Hello everyone and welcome back to the second part of how to paint Mortek Crawler. I'm going to finish the miniature itself with the remaining parts such as the straps, the counterweight, the turnwheel and the minor details. So for these parts, here are the colors which I'm going to use. The first color I'm going to use for the straps is Khorne red. This is going to be the base color on the catapult and also the staff wielding the hammer and the shovel. Once the base coat is done, I am applying Nuln oil wash. Once the wash is completely dry, I am going to use Wazdakka red as a layer on the top of the straps, fading out downwards, and the bottom area I do an edge highlight. Now I am going to use Gorthor brown and start edge highlighting the top area and then some of the sharpest features on the bottom section. And I use one more time Nuln oil wash, but only into the recesses to give the straps more definition. Now that the straps are done, I can focus on the counterweight. It is fully assembled and primed with Abaddon black as a base color. The first color I'm going to use is Eshin gray. And with a medium dry brush, I start dry brushing the whole surface of the stone parts of the counterweight. Following it with Mechanicus Standard Grey. Again, I use dry brushing, but I put more focus towards the top section of the stone. After that I use Dawnstone, and I switch onto a small dry brush, and this time I am keeping a little bit more paint on the brush and start dabbing it onto the corners and curves, and just a gentle touch around the bottom area. Now I'm going to apply one layer of Coelia Greenshade wash. Once the first layer is completely dry, then I apply a second one. Now the wash is completely dry, I am going to switch onto Incubi Darkness. And again, with a small dry brush, I leave most of the paint onto the brush and start dabbing it onto the bottom area. Then I make a mix of Kabalite green and Incubi darkness, a 1:1 part ratio. And again start dabbing it, but around halfway towards the top to have that nice transition from darker to bright. Then again I mix one more paint with Kabalite green and Sybarite green, a 1:1 part ratio. And the same technique, I start dabbing it mainly on the top area. And also just a gentle touch around the bottom part, just to have more random color variation on the rock. Now I'm going back to use Kabalite green, and with a small layer brush I start highlighting all the cracks that are on the rock. And then finishing it with Sybarite green, again with a small layer brush. I start to give a fine highlight onto the sharpest meeting joint points where the cracks are, just to get more definition. Now I can focus on the bone armor. The armor plate for the catapult is primed with Mechanicus Standard Grey as a base color. And the first color I'm going to use is Agrax Earthshade. I use a medium shade brush and start applying it onto the bone armor areas. I also base painted on the counterweight the bone armor part, and also for the crew is having the same color variation on their bone armors. Once the wash is completely dry, now I'm going to use Dawnstone. And with my small dry brush, I start dry brushing all the Mechanicus standard grey parts. As you can see on the counterweight, I'm trying to be as neat as possible, not to go over on the painted areas. Then I switch onto a small layer brush and start layering in some of the areas, especially on the armor plate, the parts, so that to have a nice transition. And finishing the bone armor with Administratum Grey. I do an edge highlight onto the areas which are the sharpest features on the bone armor. The next area which I can focus now are the armor plates. For this I'm going to use Naggaroth Night as a base color. I am applying 2 layers to have an all even cover on the areas. Next, I'm going to apply Nuln oil wash onto the Naggaroth Night painted areas. Once the wash is dry, I use Xereus purple and start highlighting all the edges of the plates, and where the pegs are, I apply some vertical lines almost till the top of each plate. Now I'm going to go back and use again Naggaroth Knight, and I start layering all the armor plates, and just where I left the lines where the pegs are, I leave them a bit more brighter and just blend the two colors so to have a nice smooth transition. Now I'm going to use Fenrisian Grey, and I do again an edge highlight on the armor plates, but I am applying it only where the curves are to have a sharp highlight to it. Now I'm going to mix the Fenrisian Grey with Xereus Purple, a 1:1 part ratio, and I edge highlight the areas where the Fenrisian Grey is finishing to have a smooth transition of the colors and blend together nicely. Now I can start painting all the metal parts that can be found on the catapult. For this I am using Leadbelcher as a base color. And I start base painting all the areas, such as the steel that is around the counterweight, the blade on the catapult, the shovel, and the hammer for the maintenance team. As you can see, I assembled and painted the crew. I used the exact same colors which I used on the bone for the catapult, the armor plates, the straps and the tools. Bear in mind, the one that is running the turnwheel, I still have not yet assembled the turnwheel. Now I'm going to use Agrex's Earthshade, and I start applying it in all the areas which are base painted with Leadbelcher. Once the wash is completely dry, I use Stormhost Silver, and with a small layer brush I start edge highlighting all the metal parts, and I also apply some very thin lines randomly on the areas to give it more damaged and scratched look, especially on the shovel. I also start base painting all the pegs that can be found on the catapult and on the armor plates. For the cloth, I use Incubi Darkness as a base color. I start base painting all the areas where are some cloths. Also includes the crews, some of the straps which are holding their tools around their waist. Now I'm going to apply Nuln oil wash onto the cloth areas. Once the wash is completely dry, I'm going to use Kabalite green. Now on the armor plate cloth, I use a small dry brush and start dry brushing the cloth more towards to the bottom part. Then I switch onto a small layer brush and I just correct some of the parts where I might have missed it with the dry brush. And also start layering on the crew all the cloth parts with the same color. And I finish all the cloth using Fenrisian Grey. I do an edge highlight in all the sharpest features on the cloth areas. Now I'm going to focus on the gold details, the gold trim on the counterweight and the sigil on the armor plate. For this I'm using Balthazar gold as a base color. As I mentioned, on the counterweight I base paint only the trim of the emblem. I want to keep the center part same old malachite stone material. As for the sigil on the armor plate, I base paint the whole sigil part and leave the trim as bone armor. Now I'm going to use Agrek's Earthshade on all the Balthazar gold painted areas. Once it's dry, I'm going to use Retributor armour. On the counterweight, I do an edge highlight. As for the sigil, I do a layer so that to have a nice shining look onto the sigil, and an edge highlight around the symbol just to make it pop out more. The only thing is left to do on the catapult is the turnwheel. As you can see, I have the turnwheel unassembled, primed with Ulthu and Grey, and I also base painted the joint rails which the staff is holding. The first color I'm going to use is Xereus Earthshade, and I start applying it mainly towards the center part. First, I'm trying to focus on the part which the model is gonna be blocking. Once the first wash is completely dry, now I'm applying a second one, but this time only around the centerpiece where the joint part is. Now at this stage I painted the inner part in the exact same way, which I'm going to show you on the next footages. Here I painted already the inside part, so I no longer need to worry about it. I highly recommend before the assemble to paint also the pegs with Stormhost Silver. And now I am giving the rest of the area the Xereus Earthshade wash. Once the Xereus Earthshade is completely dry, I am using Administratum Grey, and I start to do an edge highlight in all around in the sharpest features and also the raised surfaces, so it really nicely pops out. Now I'm going to use Rhinox hide, and all those little extensional bone parts, I start to apply some of the Rhinox hide. Close towards the joint parts, I make very thin lines just to blend together the whole parts together nicely. And finishing it with Ulthu and Grey, I do an extra fine highlight onto the sharpest features of the turnwheel. The only thing left is to assemble the whole catapult and add base. I also added the ravens to the catapult, which I painted them in the exact same way as I painted for my Kabalite Death Riders. I will leave the link down in the description below. As for the base, I used the exact same method as I did on the first part for Katakros. I will put the link as well down below. Bear in mind, I did not glue the ammunition, the counterweight, onto my catapult. In this way I can display the miniature with all the ammunitions and move the catapult head with the counterweight positioned in the correct way. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you find it useful and helpful. If so, do subscribe to my channel, hit the like button to reach out more hobby painters, feel free to share the video as well with your friends, and hit the bell button to be notified about future video tutorial contents. Thanks for watching, see you all in the next one. Cheers!